Welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today, we have Cheryl Bly-Chester, who is the owner of Rosewood Environmental Engineering. Welter, physician here in Sacramento, and Tom Tamarkin, who is the president and the CEO of USCL and Energy Site. Welcome to the show. Your big claim to fame, your invention, is the smart meter. That is something that has created controversy in a number of different ways. And we'll go into that tonight, why it has created controversy when, in effect, it's just a way of measuring electric and gas use. Why is it that the smart meter has attracted the attention of politicians and activists of all stripes?
Well, I'm not sure that it has effectively attracted the attention of politicians yet.
Oh, okay.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that because, as you're aware, we're broadcasting tonight from Sacramento, and there is, in fact, an anti-smart meter rally being held downtown, which has been advertised widely over the last several weeks, and which has brought together a number of constituents, including environmental people, including doctors and physicians, to talk about the radio frequency issues in health, as well as people who are concerned about the intent of what the government and the utilities may ultimately do with what they perceive to be too much data coming from the individual house and being shipped off to a third party, such as a utility company's computer or a meter data management computer.
Okay, so you mentioned RF as a danger of smart meters.
Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make reference to the program that aired approximately 3 weeks ago, where we started
actually 1 week ago,
or actually a week ago,
yeah.
Talking about the smart meter and our involvement in the smart meter.
Okay.
Going back to the year 1987, 88, I actually developed technology where we integrated into what we called old-fashioned electromechanical meters, radio transmitters that allowed a truck to drive by a home in a neighborhood and to obtain the meter readings from the meter by simply driving through that neighborhood. Now, in that instance, it involved putting a radio transmitter in each and every one of these meters. And the type of radio transmitter that we used, and again, our company was the pioneer company doing that in the late 80s, it involved 900 megahertz low power, meaning 100 milliwatt to 1,000 milliwatts, or 1 watt, in the ISM band. ISM meaning instrument, scientific, and medical.
In layman's term, is that the same thing as a phone that, you know, a cordless phone?
A cordless phone is 900 megahertz ISM band, correct.
Okay.
And approximately 5 million of these devices were installed around the United States, mostly by a company called Itron, and it was called an ERT, E-R-T module. And there was not one known instance of somebody claiming medical issues such as vomiting, such as headache, such as nausea, et cetera, which people are now claiming today as a result. The reason being, when this technology was installed in the late 80s and early 90s, nobody knew about it. It simply did not meet, it was not advertised in the media.
It was under the radar.
It was under the radar. And the range is, ideally, you would say line of sight, but as a practical matter, the range is in the quarter mile or less range.
Very low power.
It's very low power.
Less than
it's
a
very
walkie-talkie.
high frequency, and it's very directive. And today, modern walkie-talkies, whereas they used to operate in the 27 megacycle or megahertz CB range, they now operate in this ISM band, 902 to 928 range. So to use an analogy, we're talking about putting a walkie-talkie radio in one of these meters that talks to a device on a telephone pole or a power pole several hundred, maybe 1,000 feet away.
So my analogy of a cordless phone is pretty close.
Exactly, it's the same technology.
The same
if
thing.
you took it apart, you'd find the same electronic components.
Okay, so in
inside.
other words, you installed cordless phone technology in the meter so it could transmit it out to the truck driving by.
is my
Actually,
cordless
we
phone
did this
hurting me?
before cordless phones were even developed.
Okay, they
Your
copied you.
cordless phone absolutely does not hurt you.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, this anti-smart meter group, in part of their propaganda package, they included a picture of what we refer to in the scientific community, Dr. Bly-Chester, as the electromagnetic radiation spectrum. And we start in the audio frequency range, 10 cycles, 100 cycles, 1,000 cycles. I've just aged
Keep
myself.
going.
Today
Yes.
we call it hertz.
Right?
But 1,000 hertz, and then we get up to kilohertz and megahertz, which is commonly called radio, and then we get up to tens of megahertz, which used to be called television, and then we go higher and higher into the microwave, and then we get into something called infrared, which you can feel as heat. Then we get into something called light, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and then we get into something called ultraviolet, which starts to get dangerous because it gives you suntans or even sunburns if you stay under
Or
ultraviolet
vitamin
too
D
long.
if you do it right.
Then we get involved with X-rays, and beyond X-rays, what you would call gamma rays, alpha, beta, and gamma rays, which are nuclear rays. Now, the point I'm making is that on this electromagnetic spectrum that this group sent out, it not only shows this continuum of the spectrum from low frequency to high frequency, but it defines the energy level of the photons in each of these frequency ranges. So what it says is that in low frequency radio, the energy level of the photons is somewhere in the area of 10 to the minus 6th or 10 to the minus 7th electron volts. When we get into infrared, it's 10 to the minus 2nd electron volts. An electron volt is a unit of energy which has to do with actually moving one electron through the potential difference of 1 volt. It's a very, very small unit. So this is much ado about nothing.
Or even less than that in a way,
It's-
because if a system is designed properly, the duty cycle only needs to be, transmit your energy report. We received your energy report. Shut down until the next time we ask for the report. Is that right?
Well, again, if you
Or does it
use
done
the
that way?
analogy, if you're in a suntanning booth or you're outside in the sun to get a suntan, there's a correlation between the energy that you're receiving from the ultraviolet light or from the sun versus how much time you're in the booth or you're outdoors.
Sure. Right.
So if I'm outdoors for 2 hours, I might get a sunburn. If I'm outdoors for 8 hours, I might get a very bad sunburn. If I'm outdoors for 2 minutes, I get no sunburn. So
good.
this is exactly what Dr. Welter had just mentioned. There's a correlation between the amount of energy you receive and the amount of time.
Okay, so in other words, the whole idea of radio frequency smog or danger.
There is no such thing as radio frequency
yeah,
smog.
that's what I'm
That's a
saying.
terrible term.
What I'm saying
That's a
is-
propaganda term.
Exactly. My point is that all of this is basically scare tactics and just junk science.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But it can be a business for people.
It can be a business for people.
Well, they
Yes.
made the same business for people on EMFs fields on the high tension power lines.
Sure,
there for a while.
electromagnetic force,
Right.
which is, understand that radio frequency is nothing more than a magnetic field that changes polarity, south pole to north pole, multiple times per second. And the faster you change from north pole to south pole, the higher the frequency, but it's nothing more than a magnetic field. So the propagandist will say, well, what about the microwave oven? Because in the microwave oven, I have a high power, maybe 1,000 watt transmitter in that 900 megahertz to 2 gigahertz range, and it's actually making things get hot.
Certainly does.
It does, but it's non-ionizing radiation, and the reason that the RF energy in the microwave makes things hot is that it has an effect on the hydrogen molecules in the water that's contained in the food. If you put some device in a microwave oven that does not contain a lot of water, frankly, it doesn't get hot. This is why they say the food is cooked within, because what it does, the high-frequency microwave radio waves causes the hydrogen dipole radicals in the water to vibrate very quickly or to resonate, and that generates something we call heat. But most people don't understand that concept, so these people are saying, well, if we look at a microwave oven, that's a case of high-frequency RF power that can actually do damage, that's actually creating something to heat up. But it's not an ionization effect. It's that's how nuclear magnetic resonance works, or magnetic imaging works.
Yeah, you can melt the chocolate bar in your pocket.
Well,
You're
that's
working
how
on
it
the
was
radar.
discovered.
Exactly.
Exactly.
The man of radar range. I remember that.
That's how it happened. It was an accidental discovery. And gripes, when I was a senior in high school, I did a project where I built and took top honors in physics in the world, a nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometer, where we actually used this technique in the 70s as a means of spectroscopy, where we actually caused the hydrogen in organic chemicals to precess and absorb energy. And then we measure that energy, and we use that as a means of spectroscopy in organic chemistry. Today it's called nuclear magnetic imaging. We're way off the subject of smart meters, by the way.
Well, yeah, moving on, getting back
what
on
we
topic.
did is we fell in the trap of spending far too much time talking about this RF issue, which is really not the serious issue.
And what is the serious issue?
The serious issue is this issue about sending too much data from the homeowner to a central computer, be it in a cave in Utah or be it at the back office at SMUD or PG&E or Southern California Edison.
Okay, well, that's a real fear. I don't want the fact that I'm using a heat lamp to be known by some bureaucrat in Washington D.C. or Salt Lake City.
That's not an issue of the device. It's an issue of who has the control and the power, the political power. And I don't think it should be a political issue.
Okay,
Well, again, we're a little bit loose with language here, because a minute ago you indicated that you didn't want a third party to be aware of how you're using energy in your home. Frankly, a power meter is nothing more than a voltmeter, an ammeter, and a microcomputer that takes volts and amps, and it calculates watts, and it transmits that value. It cannot differentiate what watt is being used by what piece of what device in the home.
Now
it can't.
But can it in the future?
But with smart appliances, you could conceivably get to that point.
When we bring in the specter of smart appliances, we now have transmitters and receivers in each of these appliances who themselves have a small power meter built into them, who in turn communicate with the bigger power meter in the home, which you'd call a control device, which in turn could communicate with the utility or a third party.
But is that where it's headed?
That is where it's headed, and the fork in the road becomes, do we allow these appliances in the home to be connected to the mythical computer in the sky that today could be run by a utility company,
But
but
right
in
now
the
they've
future
already-
could be run by
They've already
a
asked for
government,
thermostats to do
or
that.
exactly under Title 24 in California, all thermostats are communicating thermostats, which means on a hot day, the utility can send a signal to that thermostat and turn your air conditioning up in temperature by 2 or 3 degrees, or
Right.
charge you a premium if you
Or
don't
turn it
agree.
off. Or turn it off,
Well,
if you agree. Right now, you have to agree.
that's the key.
but
You have
can.
to agree.
But
if
but
you
they
opt
can.
out, then you're charged a higher rate. Exactly.
Okay, to be very clear about this, a smart meter is simply something that measures the amount of electricity, and it does it in a more efficient way than the old-fashioned electrical mechanical meters did. The information on power usage can be controlled and can be fed back to the consumer, the person who owns the home where the smart meter is located, or it can be funneled to the utility company, or I assume both. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Which way do you, what mode do you advocate?
Well, in 2003, the Bush administration, under the direction of Secretary of Energy Spencer Abrams, came out with a plan which was called the 2030 Vision Plan to rebuild the transmission and distribution system in the United States over 30 years. In phase one of the 2030 vision to rebuild the system, they called for the replacement of all 135 million of these old-fashioned mechanical meters with new modern digital meters with what we call distributed intelligence, which means that each of these meters was capable of controlling and dispatching loads within the home, assuming that the consumer had products that communicated with it. It was never anticipated that that task would be handed over to a third party, such as a utility company or a meter data management company, such as Siemens, E-Meter, or the like.
It wasn't anticipated until somebody figured out how to make money on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Once the large companies, such as Siemens, E-Meter, and General Electric, and Landis+Gyr, and these other large companies, understood that this data has value. If I am able to mine the data, manage the data, archive the data, that's a job that requires equipment and infrastructure, and therefore I'm entitled to charge for it. So all of a sudden, if I'm a company in the meter data management business, I can charge the utility a cost of, say, 25 cents per month per meter that I'm managing. You multiply that in the case of Sacramento and SMUD times 600,000, and the numbers get pretty large, times 12. So you're looking at $1 billion a year plus business just to manage this data.
Plus, just like our credit cards, they can sell that data.
That's another issue. Not only can they use this data for whatever purpose, because recall these new meters have something inside them which allows a third party to turn on or turn off your service. So in theory, we can control devices within the home, or we can actually control power within the home. But you also now have a means to monitor the habits and methods of lifestyle of the consumers, and you can sell that information to other companies who are looking for information they can use for marketing reasons. That's the potential. I'm not saying that utilities would do that. Understand that utilities traditionally have been in the business of generating electricity and selling electricity and maintaining that service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this is a case where other larger companies have now inserted themselves between the relationship of the utility and the purchaser of the utility, the homeowner or the small business.
What did you originally envision the smart meter, the function of the smart meter? What did you envision its utility for the consumer?
Well, in 2001, we demonstrated here in California, which led to the enactment of the Utility Commission coming together with the Energy Commission to do a 2-year price study. And what we proposed and what we demonstrated in April of 2001 was a power meter which is located outdoors and which brings its information by virtue of a display inside the home that the consumer can look at, so that the consumer knows at any point in time what he is paying per unit of power, per kilowatt hour, and how much electricity he has used from day one of the billing period. So the analogy is when you go to a gasoline filling station and you buy fuel, you know how much a gallon of fuel costs. And as you are filling your car, you're looking at the number of gallons, an engineering unit, that you've purchased and the price in terms of dollars
And you
for
can see it
your
spinning.
purchase, and you see it spinning. So that's the analogy. We bring that same type of display inside the home.
So in other words,
That's
instead
what-
of displaying kilowatt hours, it's displaying dollars and cents.
You display dollars and cents. And obviously, if we have that mathematical capability and we have that what we call data, we can do many other things in terms of how we present the data from a graphic standpoint. We can allow a person, as an example, to set up a budget and say, I want to limit my bill to $100 this month. And we can track from day one of the billing period how much power you've used, and we can project based on your usage what your budget is going to be at the end of the month, and the utility can then accelerate or deaccelerate his use of energy to stay within his budget.
So Tom, you actually built this into the devices now?
Yes.
Into the meters now. This actually exists, they just aren't turned on.
Now, what happened is in 2003, 2004, 2005, after the California Public Utility Commission and the Energy Commission did their lengthy studies, the Utility Commission mandated that the California utilities, meaning the publicly owned utilities, Los Angeles, Southern California, Edison, San Diego, and PG&E, replace about 13 million meters with these modern communicating meters. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the leading edge of the movement that has now become nationwide. As an example, here in Sacramento, our utility, which is not an investor-owned utility, it's a municipal utility, but they got on the bandwagon and they replaced 600,000 meters with a modern communicating meter. They do that because the government made the money available through stimulus funds coming from the ARRA to SMUD and the other utilities to make the purchase of this equipment. Inside this meter, we have two sets of communicating transmitters and receivers. So you have two walkie-talkies, to use your analogy. Uh-huh. One walkie-talkie, which is operating at that 900 megahertz range, is sending information to the utility for billing. The other walkie-talkie, theoretically, is sending information to this display device and a control device, if the consumer opts for that, inside the home. The problem is when that meter is installed, that home area transceiver is not turned on. And it's not even being talked about by most utilities today.
It's technology that's there, but the utilities would prefer that their customers don't know it's there.
The utilities
they're
have
they're interested in that meter spinning as fast as possible.
It's hard to say because they talk one thing and what they really believe could be certainly something different.
The utility companies have an interest in selling power.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have a profit interest, especially in the case of investor-owned utilities, to sell as much power as they can within certain parameters, and those parameters are bound by the cost of producing power at peak demand.
Right.
So there's a space within which is kind of the sweet spot that they want to operate and sell as much power as they possibly can.
Sure.
But they want to avoid the higher end of that because in so doing, they can limit the amount of production, which causes them to kick in alternative electricity producing plants, which are called peaking stations, which have a much higher cost of operation.
Sure.
And they also have penalties associated with them because they typically burn diesel and they create much more pollution, et cetera. So this gets down to the theory, which is currently promulgated by the government, and therefore the utilities say, yes, government will do it, having to do with what we call demand response. The utilities' incentive is to limit the peak demand. Mm-hmm. And we now have a coalition operating out of Washington, D.C. called the Demand Coalition, which consists of major appliance manufacturers as well as meter manufacturers and other people within the utility industry to ensure that all new appliances that are certified by the Department of Energy and what's called the Energy Star performance criteria, in fact, have this communicating technology built into it so that they can communicate with devices inside the home.
Little black box.
Little black boxes.
Little black
Now,
box.
you applied for a grant from the Department of Energy to test meters with an in-home and with an out-of-home reading capability. Where did that go?
In April of 2009, I sent a fairly detailed letter to President Obama. I have a copy of the letter with me. And the letter to President Obama mentioned the fact that we are, in fact, a small business in California, and our company was responsible for creating this phenomena, if you will, of the digital meter revolution among these utility companies, and that we needed to ensure that this technology found its place and was used properly. And I copied the letter to President Obama, to Dianne Feinstein, to the Department of Energy, Secretary Chu, Nancy Pelosi, Henry Reid, and several other people of influence within the administration. The reason that I did this is that President Obama, from literally the day that he was elected president, before the inauguration, he talked about the smart meter being a, quote, shovel-ready project for the use of stimulus funds. So we wanted to ensure that it was done correctly. The theory being that if we're taking taxpayer money, that taxpayer money should be put to work for the consumer. That is to say, if the consumer is investing in the smart grid, there needs to be something in it for the consumer that's tangible, such as the in-home dash panel.
Right, right.
And in the summer of 2009, we applied for a government grant through the Department of Energy in something called an SBIR. I have all the documentation with me. And the objective of our government grant was to do a project consisting of, say, 20,000 meters to be studied with the in-home energy dashboard, and 20,000 meters without the in-home dash, like a placebo kind of
controlled
medicine,
great idea.
controlled
I like
reference,
that.
Right.
so that we could gain statistics. And initially, the government said, okay, that's a very good idea, and we will award you a $5 million grant. However, about a month and a half later, we received a letter from the Department of Energy rescinding that grant. I went back to Washington, D.C., I hired an attorney, we did our due diligence and investigation, and we found out the reasons why. And the reasons
In a minute, what were the
Quickly.
reasons?
the reasons quickly related to the fact that our company had gone on record saying that the alternative energy sources, green energy such as solar and wind, really were not the long-term solution.
So
we
you went against
the
political
grain,
correctness?
Point one. And point two, we went against the grain of the meter companies. And at the time, there was an undersecretary of energy named Kathy Zoe, who in fact was an executive in her prior life before she took that position with the world's largest meter company called Landis & Gyr. And after she left Landis & Gyr and went into that capacity as Undersecretary of Energy in the Department of Energy, she maintained her holdings in Landis & Gyr.
Sounds to me like Chicago politics. And,
There
I
were
wanna-
two other reasons
yeah.
as well, but you get the gist of what
I
happened.
get the idea, and that's the show. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place on the Libertarian Counterpoint. Thank you very much for being a part of it. We're at www.accesssacramento.org, 8 p.m. Thursday, noon Friday, Saturday at 4 a.m.